Oh, what a day. All right, let me see. I haven't seen you in forever, long time.
I don't think we've ever met face to face.
No, but I've seen you on video like years ago.
Okay.
Many years ago.
I'm in need of a haircut. It's okay.
Yeah, I just got mine cut. It was getting really crazy long. Hopefully this whole thing is about ready to come to an end now. California, the looniest state, they've finally got rid of their mask mandates yesterday. So I think that it's the beginning of the end anyway. They can't keep this going much longer after this.
Understood. No, our governor here is hanging on with, as long as she can. It's nuts. It's nuts. And again, what are you going to do? Oregon's a liberal state. The Oregon's dominated by the 3 northwestern counties that comprise Portland, as well as, the kind of comprises Salem and Eugene. And the rest of the state is very conservative. That's why in May,
that's why they want to leave.
Yeah, it's like we want to be gone, and I understand. It's like take your garbage and go somewhere else with it. It's like no.
Anyway, so we'll just have this totally free form, just like a conversation between the two of us, and then especially since it's the first one, and then it'll just be edited to be more appropriate length. But why don't we just start with just tell me what prompted you to write your first book, mention the book, the title, and basically what the book is about, and bring us up to speed from that point till today.
Well, with regard to the book, it took me about a year to write. I would go upstairs, get on my computer 4 nights out of the week from 8 o'clock to midnight, and either write or pout because I couldn't get anything done. And I was just real consistent about that. It took about a year to put together. The motivation was having been a prosecutor, having been a defense attorney, having been a part-time municipal judge. I got frustrated with seeing males have really bad legal experiences because they were acting in a way that was masculine and appropriate. However, it didn't coincide with what the law wanted. And there was what I perceived to be an anti-male bias in the court system, that even if they were doing everything right, they still got slaughtered. Example, this is going back about, 15, 20 years. On family law cases, I consistently told males who wanted custody of their children that if you want custody and you're not doing substantially more than 50% of the parenting time, you're probably going to lose. You have to have 75-25 in real life just to get 50-50 in the court system. It's like, what's going on here? And again, I would talk with a lot of my female colleagues, and they agreed with me. They would see the same things. And the frustrating part, even more so, was when you documented it and you did everything correctly. There was about a 30% chance that you'd still get waylaid. And you have to ask yourself, what's going on? And again, it all comes down to gender. When you have a male in the family court system trying to get custody, trying to get a fair situation, generally what happens is he gets waylaid. Example, I saw a situation where they had 50-50 custody, joint parenting, and all of a sudden the mother wanted to have sole custody. And she had bounced around from dwelling to dwelling to dwelling, 4 dwellings over the last 18 months. The father had consistent dwelling, clean, livable, wholesome. And the mother, during the pendency of these hearings, was arrested on drug charges and also was charged with reckless endangerment because she had the children present when she was consuming illegal substances. I believe it was methamphetamine. And was in custody, in jail, on a probation violation because of this. And she filed her paperwork from jail And they brought her from jail to the courtroom, and the judge, a feminist, granted her full custody and just told the father, well, look, just take care of her until she gets out of jail. And you got to ask yourself, what the blazes is going on here? Right? And when you have a wholesome father who's trying to protect his kids, and you're going to grant custody, full custody, to a drug-consuming, irresponsible mother, you have to ask yourself, what's going on with the system?
I have a question. So there is a difference between a bias in the system, unfairness, prejudice, all these things. In your experience, though, how much of this was blatantly unfair, but how much of it was actually like just flat out illegal? Like if you just actually had the money and you could take it to the Supreme Court, it wouldn't be legal no matter what the discretion was to be unfair or biased. Because I understand there's bias and that's wrong, but to me, some of the things I see are just illegal.
Well, I'm very fortunate in that I clerked for the state Supreme Court here, and I also clerked for a trial judge prior to going into practice and doing all that I said earlier. All right. And so when you're writing opinions, be you a clerk for a judge or a judge yourself, the findings of fact, at least in my jurisdiction, all right, the findings of fact that are laid out in a written decision, written opinion, cannot be disturbed by an appellate court. Therefore, if you want to lock in a particular decision, you lay out the findings of fact accordingly. Therefore, if a judge is looking to cover his or her keister, the bottom line is lay out your findings of fact correctly, and it's the likelihood of being disturbed by the appellate courts is virtually zero. So you're asking bias versus illegal. I have not seen illegal conduct committed by a judge that I can recall at this moment being posed that question to me. However, I can convey very clearly that I've seen what I consider to be, in my personal opinion, professional opinion, very strong anti-male bias, both in the family court system as well as the criminal system.
Wouldn't that violate all the kinds of statutes that have come in the last 50 years that have to do with discrimination based on many things, religion, age, sexual orientation, as well as gender?
The problem, as I see it, is that, again, I don't care what somebody's background is, what their orientation is. I don't care. Right? It's none of my business, and it's fine. You're a human being. You're a human being as long as you're polite, responsible, and civilized. The problem is if you're a heterosexual male, be you Hispanic, white, Asian, African American, it doesn't matter. The bias, anti-male bias, is there. There's there's Professor Starr at the University of Michigan who did a deep study on federal law regarding sentencing, the disparity between sentences used given to women and for men in with the same crime, same right of recidivism, same criminal history, and males are receiving 64% more severe sentences than females. And this is a female professor, University of Michigan, highly respected law school, high respected professor, and she did a brilliant job. And here's the analysis.
Well, you can just look at capital punishment. You look at a case like Jodi Arias. If that's not if Jodi Arias didn't deserve that sentence, nobody deserved it. So it's
what you'll see is most prosecutors are fearful of charging a female with first-degree murder. Their backup is always second-degree murder, because we got to make sure we treat them nicely. You don't see that with males. You especially don't see that with black males. It's like, come on, get over it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you had she was female. That's the big thing. But she was young, she was white, and she was attractive. So you just have like a quadruple effect there. The chances that a white, young, attractive female is going to the gas chamber is basically zero.
Yeah.
Now, if she was if she was old and toothless and maybe of a minority race, it's a possibility. Still unlikely, but it happened. But if you revert, it could be a young black or Hispanic male or anything, then the odds go through the roof. So
agreed. And again, I've seen it. I mean, it's when I was doing a lot of criminal law cases. I mean, you instinctively knew over time how to throw the pitch, okay, with regard to a female defendant who had committed crimes. And the key was to make sure that you showed some type of emotional trauma, some type of hardship, woe is me, all right. And invariably that worked, okay, especially if she was of a different sexual orientation. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, then all of a sudden, all the help comes rushing in, and we can't do this to you, we can't be severe with you. And again, you didn't see that with the males.
So what I see from the court system here, and where I am in Maryland, it's a wealthy area. It's the court system is nowhere near as bad as it is in some places in the country. And although there's this built-in bias that exists everywhere, but what I see is if you talk to the people like privately, they'll acknowledge that the amount of BS in family law is like overwhelming. I had the state's attorney tell me that the vast majority of all the protective order requests that they get are completely just gaming the system for an advantage of divorce, child support, whatever, and that have no legal basis, are basically fraudulent. And he's telling me that, but they don't do anything to really stop it. They just try to filter the crap out, but still to keep taking the crap. There's no consequence to women to do this.
Let me give you a real life story. This was a situation where you had a boyfriend and girlfriend, and they break up, and a little over 10 minutes later, she gives birth. And she accuses my client, okay, of being the father. And along with the petitions that you have to file with the court, you have to submit an affidavit. And in her affidavit, under penalty of perjury, she swore that she had, conjugal relations with him, and that he was the only person that she had as a sex partner ever, okay, and that he was the father, and she wanted him to be responsible for, obviously, child support, but also for health insurance, and also to pick up the majority of the cost for the health expenses for delivery of the child. And he did the math and like, no way, this is not my child. And making the story shorter, we filed the appropriate response, demanded DNA testing, had it scheduled, she didn't show up, had it scheduled a second time, she didn't show up, and she was told by the judge, you don't show up the third time, this case is over. All right, this case is over. Come back, and he's not the father. But again, in her affidavit for the petition, trying to identify him as the father, she swore he was the only one and that he was the father. And so, we get all that completed. He's not the father. We're there. And so the judge signed off on the final documents. And I said, well, Judge, my client here has incurred attorney's fees. She should be responsible for them, because obviously when she signed off on that affidavit, she knew he wasn't the father. The DNA tests show this. She committed perjury by signing that affidavit. She should pay his expenses. And the judge looked at me and says, okay, she's been through a lot. Why don't we just let this go? I said, look, I got to ask my client. And so I go out, into the hallway and talk to my client. I said, look, in my opinion, you have a right to attorney's fees here. However, if I pursue them, one, it's going to reflect poorly on me. Just so you know, and I don't care, I'll do it. All right. But you're also going to tick off the judge. He said, no, just let it go. All right. So here you have a situation where it's obvious that she committed perjury. Okay. Cost this guy, a few $1,000s in expenses. She wanted the biggest paycheck. And there's not even a slap on the hands. Oh, just let it go. She's been through enough. And that just drives you wild. It's like if the situation somehow, some way were reversed, you would never see that.
Yeah. Well, the problem that I've always seen it from day one is that people are looking for a legislative solution, a legal solution, a rule solution, and they don't understand that all these responses are caused by a biological response that is the result of millions of years of evolution. And that until people address that issue, they're never going to be able to move past that, because the modern day culture, our civilization, birth control, women in the workforce, every legal aspect doesn't match up with the biology, which is why we have this way of thinking and the way that women are treated the way they are, but legally and financially and actual real life doesn't match at all. So we have a system that's totally out of kilter. The legal system basically is looking at women the way they did 100 years ago.
Yes.
But
yes.
of course, women are in the workplace.
Yes.
They don't even think that they're to be treated the way women were treated 20 years ago. So you have this completely imbalance going on. But it's not something that can be solved like a business or by math, because people have to really understand the deep psychological reasons why people are reacting this way. And if they don't understand the evolutionary psychology of what's happening, they never get past that. So anyway, you observed all of this firsthand in all your different roles, and something went off in your head and you said, I need to write a book about this.
Yeah, I got tired of seeing it. That's what happened. All right. I mean, when you see a sound, logical, rational male, okay, being chopped up by the system, okay, and being set up by the system, or being set up by the system and his former partner, after a while, it drives you nuts. I mean, a quick example was, a fella, taking care of the family, doing everything he possibly can, and gets booted out of his house on a bogus restraining order. And within 6 days, the wife or ex-wife to be has another male partner moved right in. Bam. So she's getting financial support from the new significant other, and she's getting child support, temporary, but it's going to continue, from the biological father, and she's also getting temporary spousal support. So all of a sudden, her income has gone up because of her deceit. And that's the game that gets played consistently throughout all of these family law cases. Somehow, some way, it's a game. I mean, if you're representing males, the key is to look for where the scams are playing out. And again, I'm not saying that, men can't be deceitful. I'm not going there. I'm not trying to play men as the constant victims. But when you have a system that sets the male up to be the fall guy, pun intended, all right, it just drives you nuts. Because I was raised, reared, educated that the justice system is supposed to be the pinnacle of justice, all right? That being said, it's not what's going on. As a male advising males, I convey to males that you need to avoid the judicial system at all costs without doing anything illegal, because the likelihood of you prevailing is in the minority. In essence, I tell fellas, and I don't say this to women, that if you've been charged, indicted, criminally charged with a crime, on the criminal side, that without even looking at guilt or innocence, that you have an 85% chance of going down on that crime. That's without even looking at guilt or innocence. That's the probability that I kind of landed on as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, as a judge over time. That's the way it's going to go. Then you could say, well, that's because they're guilty. I've seen too many men go to prison in my career, and I don't have what I call God's videotape, who I believed in my heart were innocent. And the question becomes, what's going on here? And so that's where it all started. So it's with approximately 50% of the families, where there's a divorce, you have roughly 50% of our male population, our sons, being raised by women. They're not being taught the male wisdom that needs to happen with respect to rearing young males in a healthy and wholesome way into adulthood. They're getting these perspectives that are jaded, that are biased, that have nothing to do with being a proper adult, healthy male. But
it's even worse. It's even worse than that, because 50 years ago or more, I know when I was young in school, I had a lot of male teachers. You go into elementary school, even a junior high school, there's very few male teachers anymore. It's been totally taken over by women. So a lot of these kids, they don't have a father at home, and they don't even have a male role model in school. They're surrounded by women everywhere.
Part of that, today is, from what I see, the occurrence of false accusations is at an all-time high. And even myself, knowing what I know, okay, I had a situation where, and I won't go into too much of detail, but I was accused of acting inappropriately. And there's no way, no. I mean, the situation was working with a female client, and I had a practice of making sure that I had female staff around at most of the time. And there was this one instance where it was strictly myself and this client, and she started groping me. And I'm like, what are you doing? Well, I just want to help you relax. I said, no, I don't relax this way. We don't do this. And at the conclusion of the case, because this was happened off to the side, we won on 2 out of 3, and she was angry that we didn't win on all 3 out of 3. And as we're leaving the courthouse, looked at me and snarled, don't you dare send me a bill. Otherwise, I will cause you so much grief for you groping me. I'm just like, excuse me? Excuse me? I can tell you that never happened again. And again, I try to be a gentleman. I'm civilized. I don't believe in acting inappropriate anytime, with a lady, all right? Female.
Or with anybody.
Anybody, okay? The point is, if it's business, it's business. But to have that happen personally, it's like, oh my gosh. All right? And so, again, you have this this rational fear in a lot of men these days with respect to interacting with women in the in the business realm, and it's well grounded. And what it's doing is not only is it hurting the males, but it's hurting the solid females that are out there. I mean, nowadays you're getting this undercurrent where males don't want to mentor females for fear of being accused inappropriately of having done something wrong. And if that happens, just the accusation alone is you're dead in the water. Goodbye.
Well, it also affects, that's why the marriage rates completely collapse, is the lowest since they've been recording at 118 years ago. It's just almost anything, any kind of relationship with a woman is potentially has big liabilities with it.
Well, two points on that. One is you have the birth rate now is at an all-time low in recent modern history. Okay. And two, I mean, I have gone from, being pro-marriage, say 30, 40 years ago, to being, I'm going to say anti-marriage, but anti-legal marriage because of how it financially destroys men. It's like, what are you, nuts? All right. And just for anybody who's watching, the one thing you have to be careful with today is our domestic partnerships. All 50 U.S. states recognize them. You don't have to sign up for one. It can be imposed upon you after living together for a year, 18 months.
It's very bad in Canada.
Canada, it's terrible. I mean, BC definitely, British Columbia, and then recently they allowed alimony for a non-married couple. Okay, we're even residing together, right?
Yes.
Australia, another problem place.
It's all the Anglo countries.
Anywhere the British have been, that's where you're finding the anti-male dominance nowadays in the cultures. And I'm not anti-British, anti-English.
No, it started here, though. It didn't start in the UK. It started here, but it spread to Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. But Asia, Africa, Latin America, and continental Europe it has not spread like a cancer like it has in the Anglo countries. But it started in the United States.
Interesting. I was.
Well, you see the shirt I'm wearing. It's a USSR shirt. And when I first started traveling to Russia about 20 years ago, one of the things that I found out is that Women's Day is like a very big holiday there. Women generally, without making too broad a generalization, aren't treated in the best of ways in a lot of normal everyday Russian life. And Women's Day is one day where everyone celebrates all the things that women and moms do. It's sort of a universal holiday, and it's a big deal. It's a big holiday. I never heard of it, but I made sure that from that point on, that whenever I was in Russia or any former Soviet country, or it's actually in any communist country, in China, Vietnam, anywhere, that any friends, interpreters, colleagues, that I'd send them a card on International Women's Day, because I know it's a big deal over there. But one year I did a little research and found out it's an American holiday. It was made up by American Marxist feminists in New York. But as soon as the Marxist thing died off, it disappeared and just stayed in the Marxist countries. And this is the thing that just drives me crazy about the conservative media in the United States, whether it's Fox or listen to Sean Hannity or anyone, is that they maybe someone like Tucker Carlson will barely make a connection between feminism and Marxism, but most of the Ben Shapiro's and the Sean Hannity, they don't get it. There really is no such thing as feminism. Feminism was just a tool of Marxism. It was like a part of a tripod, a plan. And it's very well historically documented. And you can see it when you travel in these countries. But I also saw it when I went to a National Organization of Women's conference years ago. And I remember
that.
I was shocked because I walk into this convention center and it's like, if someone didn't tell me I was in the Now conference, I wouldn't understand it. It could have been like Occupy Wall Street. There was booths and stands for socialism, Marxism, bringing Cuban socialism to the United States, socialized medicine, union, every leftist, Marxist, socialist idea under the earth. There was like one table, small table, some brochures on it for domestic violence, one on like abortion rights, but almost like a side. The absolute main thrust of the entire thing was every normal cause that you'd associate with any far left progressive. It's even past progressive, far left socialist Marxist cause. So I started researching it and I found there's a ton of books on the subject. I mean, it's not a secret, it's just that people don't want to acknowledge it. And you'll even see people on Fox News say, well, women's rights was great when it got them, like the right to vote and this thing or the other thing. And they don't look into any of the history to understand anything of the roots of feminism. What it was is what it is. It's never changed. It never really has been about women any more than the stuff going on with Black Lives Matter or transgender stuff is about Black lives or transgender rights. It's all about another much bigger issue. But anyway, coming back to your book. So the question is, so you decided to write the book. And my question is, when you proposed, so you laid out just like, yes, and the title tells me that you understood a practical way to explain it to guys and not writing in a legal way that would just basically go over people's heads or they wouldn't be able to focus and read the book. But my question is, how much of the book is based on your legal experience and you're saying, I think if this person did this, this wouldn't happen to them in the system? And how much is it based on your own life or the lives of men you knew, friends, family, that never had these problems, and you looked at how they were leading their lives and said, okay, now I know why they didn't have this problem, because this is how they handled these situations where the men I see in front of me as a judge, as a prosecutor, as attorney, they handled the problems in a far different way.
What I discovered, first of all, when I first started practicing, I was, very idealistic, going to work with the system, going to improve the system, going to just get out there and nail it. And with about 3 years in, I started realizing, oh, this is different. And especially on family law cases, where on a lot of the family law cases, I had a very dear female friend, colleague, attorney, where I would start bringing her in on custody cases where the father was seeking custody. Because if you didn't balance it somehow, some way with a feminine presence, all right, you were setting yourself up for failure. That's the bottom line. All right. I mean, if anytime a male goes in and he's fighting for assets, fighting for custody, fighting for fairness, 9 times out of 10, I recommend that he get a female attorney, somebody to balance the gender, in the courtroom. And when it comes to cross-examination of an adverse witness, if you're a male and you start digging in deep on a female witness, you can get scolded by the court, by the judge. Oh no, you need to settle that down. Where a female attorney, prosecutor or a family law attorney, can get in there and make it a real cat fight. And so these are things I started learning early. I'm like, okay, that's where I started seeing what I call the gender disparity. And going back to your question, the book is based primarily upon situations that I encountered throughout my years of practicing. retired now, but I mean, that's what I saw, and I got tired of seeing it. And the idea was trying to find somehow some way to intervene into male lives before disaster hits, like a proactive approach. And so at the end of every chapter, there's a real life story that I had permission to discuss in the book. They're in the book, permission granted, explicitly in writing. But I changed it just to make sure that no one's privacy, again, minor changes, so no one's privacy was affected, and changed the names, obviously. But it's all about real life situations, real life court scenarios. I didn't want to concoct anything. And, I think that, with regard, I've had a lot of experiences in my life. But I didn't want to have my scope real narrow. And so I tried to make sure it was really broad based, both in terms of, ages of men that I worked with, ethnic background. And you get this common thread that you begin to see that if you're a male and you're going to interact with the legal system, you damn well better be careful, because there's a lot of landmines out there. And so the idea was, if you want to walk through the minefield, that's okay, but make sure you know where the landmines are planted. And that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, but so I assume from the way you're saying that these analogies that you're using are all things that didn't go well. You're not using examples, someone that had no problem and maybe delving into why you think they may have had no problem. You're looking at people that had problems and basically saying, this is how these problems develop. And maybe if you do A, B, and C instead of X, Y, and Z, these problems won't happen to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So I have a totally different background, because I'm not an attorney like you. I only know about the law from my own experience, mainly in business and my own divorce situations, which were not horror stories at all, and that I basically handled largely myself by just being assertive with my attorneys and insisting that they handle it a certain way. And I haven't had any problems up to this point in my life with any of the traditional things, the Me Too things, although I came close a couple times, but I recognized them and dealt with them immediately before they had a chance to blossom. Because I've had thousands of students, and I've had tenants over the years, so I've had a lot of opportunity to have problems with tenants and employees and students. And women, there's a good significant portion of any woman that if she has a problem, she's going to pull that out of her hat, like you gave the example earlier with you, that they're going to try to use that as a weapon or a tool.
Yes.
An advantage, or to get revenge or whatever. I had a situation where I had a tenant who was a college. She just graduated from the University of Florida in Gainesville, and she was up here in Maryland where her family lived, and she's working as a bartender. So another great. This is where I get a little angry with the men's rights people. Talk about 60% of all the women now are 60% of all college graduates are women. Yeah, and 90% of those 60% are all in bullshit degrees that they end up like AOC or this girl working as bartenders, because they're not STEM. They're not learning anything valuable. They're all just bullshit degrees. So this girl moved in, and I have only females in the house. And one of the rules is you can't have men overnight, because I don't want the liability. I'm traveling all over the world. I don't want to be in China and have someone have their boyfriend over, and then that guy does something or says something or some other interaction with another female roommate. And I, as a tenant, as the landlord, have no control over what the tenants are doing. I'm on the other side of the earth. So this girl moves in, and she's not there 3 days. And not only does she have a guy over, it's not even like a boyfriend. It's like a guy she met at the bar and brought home. And then she leaves him in the house and goes out the next day. And one of the other women come downstairs to use the laundry, and the guy's sleeping on a couch. So this becomes then a landlord problem, because they're all upset, because they're like, what's going on? Who's this person? Why is this man down here? This makes me feel very uncomfortable. So I go the next day and talk to the tenant, and I'm like, look, you only been here like 3 days. And, one of the cardinal rules of the lease is you can't have overnight guests. You can't have male overnight guests, especially, but really can't have overnight guests, period. And she didn't really say anything to me. She just was sort of silent. So the next day, when she hadn't really addressed it, I talked to her again. And then she sent me an email. And, with all my work with the immigration fraud stuff, I know the gender studies program. And she sent me this email basically saying, it really made me feel uncomfortable and unsafe when you came to my premises and talked to me. Well, actually, I talked to her outside the sliding glass door. I was standing out in the gravel. But I see exactly where she's going with this. And I know from talking to her when I interviewed her that one of the courses she took down there in Florida was a gender studies course. So I'm like, so instantly, unlike most men, I don't make it. I go upstairs. I tell the 3 other female tenants what's going on. I get my bag together and I go stay at my daughter's house and I evict the woman. And I don't come back to my own home until she's out. That's very inconvenient. It's very unfair. It's outrageous. Most people would say, how could you let this be out of your own house? Because I understand what you understand, that right. 85%. And I'm not putting myself in that position. And at that moment, that was a way to make 100% sure that nothing was going to happen. So I booted her ass out and I notified everyone within minutes of her pulling this stuff, my attorney, the local sheriff's office, the state's attorney, the other female roommates, friends, relatives, and I left. And within 5-6 days, I came back. And that's how I deal with things like that. You have to just be super aggressive and not aggressive to the person, aggressive legally through officials, through the government.
Right. Yeah.
To the person, you're completely the gentleman, perfectly polite. Behind the scenes, you're just on attack mode. And
you have to use overwhelming force, but at all times you have to make sure that everything that you say, write, communicate, and no matter what the form, 1, you don't use profanity. 2, you don't use threatening language, and 3, you make sure you're civilized. But
you don't even raise your voice.
No, agreed. Yeah, all of a sudden you're threatening.
That's violence now, especially nowadays.
You're threatening them, okay? Or it's harassment, okay? Or menace. Okay?
They're unsafe.
Yes. No, I completely agree.
But this is the kind of stuff that just, what I see most men is falling into 2 categories. Either they don't get it and they keep on getting caught in the legal snare because they're not reading your book or listening to me, or they become total beta wimps that are just so pathetic. I just want to just leave the country. And the solution isn't either of those. The solution is to be a very strong male, but to deal with it in the proper way. And if you deal with it the proper way, you don't have to be weak. You can be super strong. And
there's a third alternative, or a third choice, is that it can't happen to me. It won't happen to me.
That's true.
And to me, that's the dominant factor. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, she wouldn't do that, or no. With most situations that involve conflict between men and women, it's a battle over resources, it seems, especially in divorce. And it's I want this, I want that, gimme. And the objective is to clean the male out.
Or children.
Yes. Well, again,
I've seen a lot of fighting where there's no money, no assets, but it's over control of the children. And it's not usually the man trying to take the children from the wife. It's usually the wife not wanting, basically saying, I'm done with this guy. I don't have a relationship with him anymore. Therefore, I don't want I don't want my children to have anything to do with this guy.
Well, there's 2 things going on here. One is there's this bias among women, generally speaking, okay? And I'm making a generalization, is that they can change fathers like they change hats. Okay, new father, rotate in there, okay? And you see that time and time again. Yeah, well, he needs a father figure. Well, he has a father. Well, no, I like him better. Okay, that's huge. You see that constantly. The other one is that with respect to child support, child support is calculated based upon incomes, your child care, health insurance costs, but more significantly, the most significant factor is how many overnights they're spending with each parent. In other words, if the father is only getting, or let's say a non-custodial mother is only getting every other weekend, well, that person who's paying child support is going to be paying the maximum amount of child support. But if they're doing shared custody, roughly 50-50 parenting time, the amount of child support drops way down. Again, generally speaking, the dominant income is coming from the father, not the mother. And so the whole issue here is how much money can I get? All right. And it doesn't matter what the father is spending with regard to clothing or other needs other than food and sustenance, all right, or necessities. It's, he's putting all these other things, but I still want the money because that money.
Yeah. Everyone knows in reality, in a lot of cases, child support is actually a substantial part of that is actually alimony. No matter what.
I call it de facto alimony because more often than not, again, in my opinion, from what I've seen over a few decades now, is that child support money does not go for child support. There's one story in the book that I wrote, and I know this person extremely well. And at the time, this goes back 10 years, his child support obligation was $750 per month. And he was sending $1,500 per month. And I spotted him, I go, why are you sending this? He's because she keeps a log, a monthly log that he can see at any time, and she keeps all the receipts, okay, and breaks out the utilities and shows exactly where his money is going. And he told me, he goes, okay, I'd be a damn fool if I didn't send her more money because she's spending it on the kids. All right. If you had more of that conduct, you'd have a heck of a lot more cooperation among the people that are paying child support, generally speaking, the men.
But something that surprised me, because it's not an anomaly, I've seen it too many times, and it's a relatively recent phenomenon because of all the state programs to help single moms. I know at least 5 women I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years where they don't want any support money from the husband because they know that, because the husband is fine. I mean, the ex-husband, the dad's fine. I mean, he's not like a criminal or a drug addict or
right.
They just don't want him in the life. So they refuse the child support because they don't want the children to even have weekend visitations or anything with it. And they're on every program with the state, food, rent, phone, everything, and they're just getting the money from the state. So the state is the de facto father, and they have the control of the kids, and the father is out unless the father has the will or the money to fight, which, a lot of times they don't, depending on the socioeconomic level.
What you will see in many states, if that's the case, the states will go after the father for support. You see that at least most of the states that I'm familiar with, they'll go after the father for child support, and they'll collect it from him. It goes into their account, and then they continue to pay the mother what they were paying her, but it's essentially the state is subsidizing themselves with regard to what they're paying out to the mother.
Well, all the 5 cases I'm mentioning are all 5 where the ex-wife and ex-husband are living in different states. They might be adjacent different states like Maryland and Virginia, but they're not in the same state. And there's no mechanism. I don't care if it's on paper, it doesn't work. There's none of these men are paying child support, but none of the mothers are trying to get child support, and none of them want child support because none of them want to have to be able to give any kind of visitation to the fathers.
Understood.
Anyway, anything the state's involved with is screwed up. If the whole world hasn't learned from COVID that the government can't do anything right, I don't know. Nothing will ever straighten people out on how incompetent the government is on that. So what year did you write the book?
This was done, I think 2010, if I remember correctly.
And you said it took you about a year and a half to write?
Little over a year, yeah. And it's still current. I mean, I would say it's more current today than it was back then. And just for the folks that may be interested, you can find it on Amazon.com as well as Kindle.
Well, at the end of the video, I'll put links in the bottom so people actually just click on it and go right to Amazon and buy it. But it has been a long time, so there must be some changes. So I'm curious, what if you took all the chapters and you just had to pick one chapter that had changed the most and one chapter that had changed the least, what would those 2 be?
The last chapter is preparing for the divorce. It's obviously different in all different jurisdictions, but that's remained the same. If you see it coming, you need to prep, and that's the chapter I would say that has remained exactly the same. You need to be proactive. You need to get on top of things. You need to protect yourself, making sure that you have all your I's dotted, your T's crossed, your documentation being taken care of, and know where things are and have them in a protected place. Roughly 72% of all divorces that are filed in the U.S. are filed by the wife. And custody goes to women right around 82 to 85% of the time. So you have to be aware of those things, and filing first does matter in the sense that you can set the chessboard up to favor you if you file first. Is it imperative? No, but it's a good idea. And again, to have all your ducks in order. As far as has anything changed dramatically? Not really. We're pretty much where we were 10 years ago. I cannot say that things have vastly improved legally for men. However, I can say that an awareness of men's issues, of where men are being, I'll use the word abused by the system, or at least biased in the system, that awareness is more prominent than it ever has been since I've been doing any of this. And that's really good to see. What I've created on Facebook is there's a group of 17 different discussion groups that are all networked and linked. The main group is called Friends of Protection for Men.
I'll put all those links in the video.
This is all discussion groups, and our number one rule is no profanity. Another one is like, no, we're not getting into derogatory personal remarks. We're here to discuss issues. And so what my goal has been with, say, social media is to teach men the benefits of networking, of working together. I mean, instead of being, I'm going to be a lone wolf. No, don't go there, okay? Wolves are more successful when they hunt in a pack. And not that you're going to hurt somebody, mind you, but the protection is there. The support is there. And that's where you have to go, no matter who you are.
Do you recommend in your book that men seriously consider hiring a female attorney?
No, and I probably do that in the next edition. I think it's wise. Okay, if you have a situation in the courtroom where you have a male, a father represented by a male attorney, and a female represented by a female attorney, it looks kind of lopsided. I think it goes that lopsided. And to be candid with you, I would recommend to you hire a male attorney. Generally speaking, all things being equal, choose the male if you're a female. All things being equal, if you're the male, choose a female. You get that balance that you wouldn't normally have. And because of the way the political correctness is today and the system is today, I think you need to have that.
In my divorce, I had that way. I was divorced. I filed for divorce in 2007. So right there, that put me in the 28%, not the 72%. And I was completely on your page back then. I hired a female attorney. But right off the bat, I didn't like the way things were going because she was a professional attorney. I was paying big money to her, and she kept on postponing and delaying things because of her kids, not because of like trips to the emergency room, but like soccer games, school recitals, this kind of crap. And it was really irritating. But from my business experience, it doesn't look good to the other side to fire an attorney.
Agreed.
No matter what the reason is, they don't think it's they think it's because you have a weak case or there's a problem.
Yes.
So I'm like, crap. So I tell her, we got to get someone more aggressive to help you out here. So we get a male attorney involved. So now I'm paying, $700 an hour instead of $350 an hour.
Right.
And I basically have to have, one for the presence, for the discrimination in the system, and the other one to actually get anything done behind the scenes. And, the whole system was a joke, and I was managing the whole thing myself. But at that point, I had like 30 years of litigation experience from my business. And when I first started selling HV helmets, and I was working, before HV Sport, when I was just selling helmets, I was doing all their products liability stuff. And when you're an attorney, there's only like 5 attorneys in the United States, 5 law firms in the United States that handle like helmet liability cases. It's a nightmare. It's why there's no America. There was like 30 manufacturers of motorcycle helmets in the United States in 1970, and today there's 0. everything's made overseas because they all got it's impossible to exist as a helmet manufacturer in the U.S. So I was the person that was like the expert witness that had to go to, it was deposed by the other side, that had to do everything, because the goal of the American attorneys was to keep the Italians as far away from the American court system as possible, because the system in Italy is so different that if they came in, they would just open up a hole you could drive a bulldozer and Mack truck through. And it was a nightmare experience. So they would always have me do anything to do with these lawsuits. And they're terrible. I mean, people, you have to deal with young people that have been paralyzed for life. And, you know, it just never a case where the helmet's actually defective. It's just life. People are hurt, they're injured, and they have no way to pay for these huge expenses, let alone pain, suffering, and all the other things that people sue for. But all of this gave me an experience that the average guy doesn't have. So when I went into my divorce situation, I mean, I had 30 years of gruesome, hard legal experience, even if it wasn't a family law, understanding the way that things work, the unfairness, because people that never have gone through the legal system believe what they're taught in school about how it's the greatest system in the world, it's so fair, or it's mostly fair, and they have no idea the reality of what it's really like. So I was very fortunate to go in basically with no delusions that I was going to not face anything but an uphill battle, and it was going to be completely unfair all the time, and only my persistence and tenacity was going to make me prevail in the end.
Understood.
But so yeah, I agree on your point of the female lawyer. The only caveat would be is to really interview them and make sure that they're aggressive. Because I met some female lawyers after that were like absolute pit bull terriers that were more expensive, but I wish I paid the money on, because they wouldn't have been more expensive than two attorneys.
Right. No, I
I would
understand.
have been better off paying $450 an hour than $350 an hour for one really.
Right. No, I agree.
Live and learn. But you know what? After that whole experience, that's just one more man that, I'll never get married again. So, yeah, I hope women are enjoying winning this battle, because there's going to be a lot of cat ladies in the generation.
Again, I cannot honestly recommend to any male these days to get legally married. The only time in today's world that you should get legally married, if you want to have a ceremony, fine. But the only time I would say it's okay to get legally married, that even then you have to be careful if you're going to bring a woman in from overseas on a K-1 visa. But even then you have potential problems there, because she can use that against her advantage.
My whole thing. So, but I tell men not to do that, not because of that reason, not because of the marriage fraud reason, but because the whole reason you're going overseas is mainly for two reasons: is to get a woman that hasn't been ruined by the affluence and the feminism of the Western countries, especially the US and the Anglo countries, which just creates an incredibly unattractive, unappealing personality. And because the weight problem, I mean, we have a pandemic in this country. It's not COVID, it's obesity. And it's just shocking to me, if I look at my intern program, to see 19, 20, 21-year-olds, these people, average age of marriage for girls getting older every year, it's up to like 28, 29 years old now. Well, they're already morbidly obese, many of them by, 18, 19, 20 years old. They're almost all overweight. I can tell you out of 1,000 interns I had in 20 years, that not 10% of them were slim or normal. So if you're a guy and you don't want to deal with the feminist bullshit personality, and you want someone that's normal body weight, let alone slim or attractive, you're going to have to go overseas. But you bring them back to this country, it's just a matter of time before they start plumping up and before the culture starts ruining. So if you really want this, you need to be self-employed, and you need to go live in their country, or pick a third country and move in, or date, or do whatever. But bring them to the United States. It is not a good solution. So many end up in the green card fraud thing, as you mentioned. Even the ones that don't, though, eventually they just become the same problem as American wives. I've seen this over and over again. So, but I wouldn't even go as far as you. I would not only tell guys not to get married, I'd tell them not to cohabitate. Say, the farthest I would go is say, you want to have a serious monogamous relationship, you commit to a woman that it's just her, you're not seeing other people, okay. But she's still got to have her own apartment, her own condo, her own house, whatever. I would not even, because the whole system is stacked against you.
So what I do, I'm actually working on a project right now. I'm highly concerned about a domestic partnership being imposed upon you when you've resided with someone for, it usually kicks in somewhere between 12 months and 18 months. Right? Under 12 months, you're not going to get a domestic partnership imposed. After 18, probably. If
that's nothing. It's nothing. 18 months.
But people say, well, what's a domestic partnership? All it is a divorce without the possibility of alimony. So if you don't get married, there is no possibility of alimony, except in Canada. Okay. This is the U.S. now only. I couldn't speak to Australia. But what I recommend to men is that if you're going to cohabitate before she moves in, then you put together a cohabitation agreement and you identify with specificity that this is not a domestic partnership. This is a cohabitation agreement, and you identify what each party is responsible for. And she doesn't necessarily have to see an attorney, but you have to give her the opportunity to see an attorney prior to.
You know, as an attorney, if the man has enough money, and especially if he has a lot of money, that will be challenged. That the lady will say that she was under duress or she didn't know or blah. And even if it's thrown out, he'll still spend a lot of money.
If he has a lot of money, then what he does is here's a cohabitation agreement. Here's $5,000. Okay. You pick your own attorney. You get the advice that you want. Okay. And you make sure you give her at least 30 days. Okay. To review everything, have ample time and the resources. Okay. To be legally advised with respect to what's going on here.
Much safer for them to keep their own residence.
I know. I know. But all too often,
what I think throws the whole thing upside down, because I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I watch everything. I watch the men's rights stuff, the red pill stuff, the MGTOW stuff, the pickup, the date, anything to do with these men's issues I watch, because there's a common thread. They all basically agree that the female, they all agree on the problem on the female side. It's just how they handle it is vastly different between like the pickup artists and the red pill guys to like MGTOW and men's rights and everything in between. But I always looked at this as a political thing, and I still do. I still think that it's a political ideology taking advantage of deep biological human behavior between the sexes. I still don't believe that practically anyone involved on the left, it actually has anything to do with women. And you can see that from the Me Too movement. You can see it with Andrew Cuomo, Bill Clinton, with Biden. It's only about Me Too when it's on the right, when it's a conservative or a Republican or a libertarian. If it's someone on the left, and the farther left they are, the better, they can do anything to anyone. They could have little girls. It doesn't matter. So it's one of the things that drove me crazy when I first got involved, right about the time I met you, is that the domestic violence shelters across the United States had this franchise, this walk a mile in her shoes, to emphasize, how men couldn't possibly understand how difficult it was to be a woman. Because, women work in all the coal mines and offshore oil rigs. They fight all the wars. They work outside in the wintertime. They do all the really hard things in life. Unless you walk in their high-heeled shoes, which they use basically to attract men to spend money on them, you couldn't imagine what it's like to be a woman. And they would put the local domestic violence shelter here in Frederick called Hartley House. There was a big street fair in Frederick, and they would have one of these events at these fairs, and they would encourage, if stupid beta men want to do this, if male feminists, who I want to make clear that however low opinion I have of feminists, male feminists are at least 300 meters below the feminist. There's nothing lower in the world than a male feminist. So they would get kids like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old little boys, and they would get them put in these shoes and prance around in these high-heeled shoes. And the boys didn't understand anything. They didn't understand anything about it at all. And it really pissed me off, because from dealing with my interns, I was dealing every year with seeing more and more of the emasculation of young men.
Right.
I didn't have college guys that could change it. I can't tell you, as the owner of the company, how many times I had to change tires of 20-something-year-old male college students because they couldn't change a tire in their car. None of them could even drive a manual transmission. They could only drive automatic transmissions. It was just amazing how in like less than 25 years, the country had become so emasculated. So this walk was particularly offensive to me. And I started a campaign to bring attention to the damage this was doing. I did a Facebook page. I got Harry at the National Coalition for Men to write several letters. I talked about it to all the politicians that asked me for money every election year. If I gave money, I said, I better not see you, because they would go Republican or Democrat, conservative. They would get, it'd be surprising how people are so stupid. They don't even understand the bigger picture. And you'd actually see like conservative Republicans, and they would like put on a pair of these high heel shoes, have a picture, a photo out taken because they wanted to support women. So I pushed hard. I said, you do this, not only am I not going to give you any money, I'm going to take out Facebook ads and support your opponent, and I'm going to ridicule you for being for feminizing. Because if you call them effeminate, then you get into the whole, well, what, are you homophobic? I said, no, you're hurting young men. I don't care what you do. You could be gay, trans, transvestite, hermaphrodite. I don't care. I care what you're doing to young men, the fact that I can't find a 20-year-old that knows how to change their tire in their car. They don't know the difference between a Phillips screwdriver and a flat.
They were probably raised in a single-parent household again.
So, so we went on for years, and it got a lot of attention, and for sure, some people didn't start attending, and the people that attended were the more left and the beta males and the hangers-on kind. So I wouldn't say it didn't have any effect, but it certainly didn't end the event. But then it ended in 1 year, when the trans thing about 4 or 5 years ago, because when that event offended trans people, which wasn't actual trans people, it was the left that was using the trans thing during like right at the beginning of the Trump time.
Right.
Those events disappeared, not because they cared about any damage they did to men or boys, but because it was offensive to trans people or any of the other 87 different genders that they made up that week or that day. So then that just absolutely reconfirmed in my mind what I always thought is this has always been political. But then I wonder, what is the end game? And this is where I have a big disagreement with the conservatives on Fox News and a lot of the people on this women's sports thing. I love it. I want to watch them eat their own. I think it's great. They should let all those trans guys compete. Then there'll be no women there at all. And then they will see what the results are of their own actions. The fact that they were the useful idiots. What Yuri Bezmenov said more than 30 years ago, that feminists were the useful idiots of the Marxists. And once the Marxists had used them, they would be tossed away. They were never going to have a seat at the table. It was never about women. It was never, ever had they any chance of having any power. And this thing is perfect. We have more than 50 years since the National Organization of Women, and now girls can't even compete in sports because boys that say, I feel like a woman today, are winning all the trophies.
Right.
That's hysterical. I'm not supporting not supporting Fox or Tucker Carlson, anything on that. They need to take them down, because trans people aren't even upset by this. It's the left. So I don't care about them. And even if trans people were upset, you know what? 51% of the population is women. And the vast majority of those, whether they admit it or not, hold some feminist ideology, from radical feminists to even the most conservative woman. I don't care if it's Candace Owen or Laura Ingraham holds feminist positions that would not have been acceptable for women to have 30, 40 years ago. So I'm not worried about 0.3% of the population. I'm much more worried about the 51% of the population. So when I see people like Tucker Carlson wasting time and effort, energy on this sports trans issue, I'm like, you're crazy. Let the left and the feminists battle it out and take themselves out. That's why the left is so successful, is because they put all these crazy coalitions together that really have nothing to do with each other, and they come all together, and you got to fight them all in one glob. Whereas the right, and just like the men, they all segregate themselves in smaller and smaller groups, and they don't know how to band together.
Understood.
And fight. So in family law, I'm thinking, well, how does this work out eventually? Because a couple of years ago, you know, if you were talking to a judge or a lawyer about this issue, they'd say, that's all political bullshit. It's a fad. It will pass. The court doesn't care. The judge doesn't care. This isn't going to affect divorce or alimony or child support. You can't say that today. The CIA, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, NASA, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, these people all now endorsing a genderless society, a woke society where there is no definition of male and female. This is coming to the court system. So what happens when you have a situation where people are identifying themselves as different genders, and not even genders, as mothers? What if the father identifies as a mother? You could even be in an area where the judge would say that's ridiculous. But you know what? He's going to have people coming after him from within his own system. I don't believe all those people in the Pentagon actually believe this bullshit. But you see these generals kowtowing like they're a member of like the far left part of the Democrat Party. Well, why? Because they don't want to affect their job, their pension, their retirement, their promotions.
That's it. That's hitting the nail on the head right there.
Yeah, so this is the same thing in family court law that's going to happen. So someone's going to come in and you're going to have like, who's what gender, who's the mother, who's the father, there's two mothers, there's two fathers. The mother's the male, the father's the female. It's going to be a mess.
No,
and
the next 10 years are going to be phenomenally interesting.
It's going to be, I think, I'm glad I'm not going to be in it, but it's going to be so interesting to watch this. It's going to be just a mess. I don't know how it's going to turn out. Nobody does.
Agreed.
But I know that the Russians and the Chinese are loving it. They don't need sitcoms in Russia or China. They just watch American television news.
I get it. You're singing to the choir.
I think that so many Americans don't realize how, maybe the Hillary Clinton email, James Comey, Clapper, all this issues has woken them up a little bit. But I think that so many Americans don't realize how much of the legal system is really about protecting people's own jobs, careers, pay, retirement, and not about truth, justice in the American way, about the founding fathers, the Constitution, about morality. It's really about maintaining the status quo and protecting financial interests and other things. And I mean, the good old boys club is true. What the lie is, it's not a good old boys club, and it's not necessarily old. It has nothing to do with age or gender. It could be young women. You can look at ladies running Black Lives Matter to find $1 million houses. People. And I try to tell this to people because I spend a lot of time in communist countries, in socialist countries, in fascist countries, in Thailand, that's a monarchy. All systems of government work the same. The people in power do everything possible to stay in power and to make as much money as possible.
Yes.
And if Americans think that if Anthony Fauci doesn't operate any differently than his counterpart in Moscow, Beijing, Bangkok, Rio de Janeiro, Nairobi, they're all the same. It's universal.
I agree. You're I'm there.
So when is your next book coming out?
I'm hoping for it to come out next year in 2022. It'll be an update of this, and then the one project I'm working on, because I think you asking where everything's going. I'm trying to put together a scenario. I'm still working on here. I have a fair amount of writing done on it. Is on cohabitation agreements, and we talked about the financial aspect of having to get an attorney for her potentially or whatever. That's where I think the biggest need is to make a cohabitation agreement that you can kind of do like a fill in the blank scenario. All right, that if somebody who's trying to do it right and trying to put it on paper, who doesn't have the assets, the financial wherewithal to go out and hire an attorney to do it, to put something down on paper that will protect them in court to the extent you can be protected. I mean, it's better than nothing. All right, and bring that in at a cost that's reasonable for the average Joe or average Tom. And again, salaries can use it as well, not a problem. That's where we need to go, I think.
I've got a suggestion for you that I think will greatly increase the sales and distribution of your book. Do an audio version so that people that don't read, which is a lot of people, can listen to it. Can listen to it in the car.
Yeah.
Can listen to it. I mean, I don't have time. I spend my whole life in front of computer screens reading. I don't have time to read books, but I'm listening to Audible. I'm listening to audiobooks. I'm listening to podcasts all the time. And I'm absorbing almost all my information from YouTube and from podcasts and from Amazon Audible books. So.
No, I'll look into it, and I'll talk to you more about this later.
I would sponsor that because I know I would love reading all these kind of books, but I've given up on actually reading paper books a long time ago just because of the speed of life nowadays. And the reality is people have such short attention spans. It's easier to catch them on. You can see this.
If you're driving to and from work, I mean, it's a good time, okay, to actually sit down and listen.
Or an airplane.
Yes,
because I sit in a plane for 14 hours going to China. I can listen to Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson podcasts for literally all the way across the Pacific Ocean. I've just heard a year's worth of podcasts in one way of my round trip. So, because the whole point, I mean, I assume you're right in the book. You like to make some money, but that's not the primary thing. You're trying to help people and get the information out. It's not like you're going to become a multimillionaire with this book, and the information in there could really save people their lives, literally their lives, considering something that's not talked about.
I've given away thousands and thousands of copies of my book, okay, to make sure they got into the hands of the people who needed them. And so, so it's, again, the idea is to have some type of positive impact upon the next generation and the new crop of males that's coming up. That's the goal. That's the important part.
I agree. All right. Well, I appreciate your time today, and I'll get this thing edited, and we'll put all the links in and everything. And yeah, we'll talk as you get farther down the road, we'll talk about the audio version, because I think that will a lot of people that just won't read will definitely listen. You could also think about doing a series of video casts too, because even it's amazing. People that won't read a book will actually look at a video of someone literally just talking into a camera. If you look at Jordan Peterson stuff, he's just talking into a camera, and millions of people watch it. I'm what would be the difference between if you just turn the screen off and listen? People still like to be able to look over, have that connection that there's a person on the other side.
Some folks need the visuals. I mean,
it's quite interesting.
That's fine.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a great day.
Michael, always a pleasure interacting with you. Love you to pieces. You take care of yourself.
All right. We'll talk soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.